Hello, I'm Del with Healing Frequencies Music, and I am here to bring you another awesome video on tuning. The big question of the day is there really a problem with A440? What I'm going to do is go a little bit deeper, geeky music stuff for some of this. But as people ask me questions, I go research, find out a little bit more about how tuning and temperament and all those things work in the universe itself, because everything is based on natural laws and we have to fit ourselves within those natural laws. It's kind of like gravity. I mean, you got to live with it because it's part of how the world functions. And it's the same thing with how music is set up itself. And that includes all the nitty gritty pieces. Some of it I don't understand because I'm not a physicist. And there's a whole science behind that, musical acoustics, and they learn all those nitty gritty details. Those of us who are performers and teachers didn't necessarily go that far into it. So I've had to do a little bit of additional research. So without further ado, I need to share my screen. Then we're going to go right into the presentation. Oops, we're not there yet. Okay. We're going to go from the beginning. And I love to draw the curtain. And I'm going to move myself up here to the top. Is there a problem with A440? It's like I said earlier, today I get to put on my doctoral hat, doctor of music, like that, and $2 to buy me a nice cup of coffee. Here we go. Is the problem really with A440? Or could the problem be with music and tuning in general? Or does it have anything to do with the natural laws? Or is music both imperfect and perfect? I said that backwards. Lots of things to think about. Specifically, is it A440 that's specifically the problem, or is it something within music itself? Let's find out. In thinking logically, this is where we get to put the common sense hat on too. Throughout history, every conceivable pitch has been used because concert pitches and temperaments differed from region to region until standards were set. Now, if you don't know what temperaments and concert pitches are, I'll get into that a little bit more here in a minute. Just like knives and guns, intentional use is what determines if, there's the big if, something is harmful or useful. Intention rules. I have some really awesome kitchen knives. I need them for cooking. But if somebody who wanted to do something stupid came in and decided to use it for something else, the intention of that tool has now changed. So think about that when it comes to A440. There was not a standard of tuning or temperament until the 20th century. And part of that, you'll learn why that's possible, why that happened. Natural tuning is based on Pythagorean ratios, which is simple ratios. Most people are familiar with Pythagoras. The problem is known as the Pythagorean comma. And there's lots of videos on that. Basically, when you start tuning in fourths and fifths and you keep going up and eventually you come back to the octave, it's really out of tune. And they used to call it the wolf tones in the Baroque era. Pythagorean ratios. This is what they look like. This is as simple as it gets. This is the Dorian mode. So you notice it, notice at the bottom, you have D, E, F, G, A, B, C, and D. This is the decimal. This is the ratio. And this is the interval distance between notes. You're noticing that F and C have an interesting ratio right there. Well, it's because they're not necessarily in the key of D. Dorian, they might be, but if you were to change that to a C sharp and this to an F sharp, which is in the key of D, that ratio would change. Just throwing that out there. Here's the problem with music. And before we go into showing the rest of it, this instrument over here is a silver lyre that was from about 1,000 years before the time of David in the Bible. And it is in the British Museum. And there are people, Richard Dumbrill is the guy's name, who works with this lyre and has figured out how to tune it. And Dumbrill is Dumbrill, Richard Dumbrill. You can look him up and see all the work that he's done with this lyre and the original Sumerian hymn that was written for this lyre, I believe, that's on Sumerian tablets. All right, so with that, let's go forward. Music is meant to be in tune as well as out of tune. You're thinking, ew, okay, why? It brings a balance within harmonics. Remember how I talked about the Pythagorean comma? You fix the Pythagorean comma by making adjustments. Musicians spend their entire lives learning to play in tune. And I'm thinking, if it's such a simple thing to do, why is it so complicated? Well, we tend to make things a lot more complicated than they should be. Here's a lot of things that go into how tuning works. Number one, temperature and humidity greatly affect whether an instrument plays sharp or flat. When an ensemble tunes to A440, chances are they'll play closer to A442 or higher at some point. Now, if you are playing in a professional ensemble and you've got a keyboard, like a piano that's playing with you, you're going to stay close to that 440 because that piano is a solid instrument and you're going to tune to the piano. If you've ever been to a concert, you're going to notice that if there is a piano on the stage, the principal violinist will have the oboist tune and the oboist will tune to the piano. If not, they use a tuner because wind and string instruments change pitches as they play based on temperature and humidity. The example, when I was creating the 528 Creative DNA album, I played the clarinet on part of it, but it's in the 444 concert pitch. Well, my clarinet is made to play in 440. So I made sure my instrument was really warm that day and that I had a barrel on that was slightly shorter to make it play sharp. It took me a while of playing a lot before I recorded, so the instrument was overly warm. At that point, I could play in the 444 concert pitch, but it was only because my instrument was warm enough. Wind instruments tend to play flat when they're cold and sharp when they're warm. And again, this will vary with the construction materials of the instrument. Musical intervals, that's the distance between notes, within music must be adjusted for optimal tuning. That's all going to be based on what key you're in, what notes you're playing within the key, where that note fits within the chord. There's so many factors that go into optimal tuning. Instruments have varying tuning tendencies within registers. As a college professor who taught music education courses, one of the things that I had to tell people in woodwind tech was, okay, when you're teaching a band, you got to remember that saxophones and flutes will always play sharp in their highest register. So they have to learn to bring those pitches down, or everyone else in the ensemble ends up playing sharper right along with them. So ensembles must learn to understand the tendencies of the musicians around them if they want to play in tune, because no two instruments are going to have the same tuning issues. That's why playing in ensembles, especially at the beginner level, is difficult because they haven't learned those nuances yet. Intent rules. Now we're going to go to the geeky science stuff. Scientists are now saying that intention is more important than anything else. It's the observer effect. Or, as we say, quantum physics at work, and it's really quantum entanglement. It's when you're intending to do something, it's a huge deal. If you intend that A440 is harmful, then it will be harmful for you. And that's in bold because I get so many comments about A440 being harmful. Well, do you want it to be harmful? Great, then it's going to be harmful for you. But if you choose to not let it be harmful, then it's fine. And I'll explain more of that in a bit. Attitudes determine what we choose to be helpful or what, okay, I think the wording here is weird. So attitudes determine what we choose to be helpful or harmful for our system. Are you going to have an attitude of gratitude, or are you going to have an attitude of fear? That is going to affect everything in your being, your spirit, your soul, and your body, and the music you listen to. And of course, now we have cats playing. Remember the placebo effect. This always confused scientists because they would give, they would always have a control group. They'd do a study of like 100 people, 50 people they would give the pill, 50 people they would give them a sugar pill. And just as many people who took the sugar pill had the same results as the people who actually took the pill. They couldn't figure it out. Well, this all has to do with intention. They all thought that they were getting the real thing. And they're like, oh, I'm going to get well. I'm going to get well. I'm going to get well. Their intention is what made them get well. That's the placebo effect. We get what we think, we do, and we speak. We are living today what we framed with our thoughts in the past. That's either yesterday, last week, last month, last year, 10, 15, 20 years ago. Once we decide to change our attitude, then we can reframe those things that came from our past so they no longer affect us. I have other teachings on that. Now we're going to move into a lighter moment, and yes, pun intended. We're going to see how music connects with everything else. And I just put this picture here because it's cool. You'll notice that each musical frequency also has a color, which is measured in nanometers. And you will notice that C is green. It is not red, as you will see on several other charts, but we'll skip past that for now and move to the next section. Where do we go from here? Now that we've learned a few things. Music should be chosen based on what feels good to the listener. What do you like to listen to? Music only becomes harmful when it's too loud and can damage the eardrums, or lyrics create negative or destructive emotions. Keep that in mind. There's a lot of music out there now that is very degrading. Be careful. If you don't want that to affect you negatively, don't listen to it. Lyrics determine the intent and feel of the music. So I encourage you to read lyrics before you listen to music, before you listen to a song. And there are some frequencies that are meant for healing, such as ultrasound, Rife frequencies. There's others that are higher frequencies, like in the 100,000, 200,000 range of hearing. And humans can only hear up to 20,000 hertz. So we're talking some of these frequencies are in 100,000, 200,000, which is way higher than what you can hear. There is no scientific evidence that any concert pitch or temperament is harmful. Harmful. I said it wrong, I think. Think about this statement for a minute. We choose our destiny by our words and actions, and those words and actions frame our daily life. This includes what we say about the music that we're listening to, or that we think is harmful or not harmful for us. Now we get into the geekier music stuff, and I'm going to try to explain this in as simple of terms as possible so that the non-musicians will hopefully understand it a little bit better. You'll see this has got all kinds of crazy things that music majors have to learn. You're learning your intervals, your chords. There is your circle of fifths. There's some scales, some musical terms. Okay, more. We'll go on. Concert pitch and temperament throughout history. You'll understand those things in a minute. Concert pitches varied anywhere from A, this is the A above middle C, to A at 417 hertz to A at 458 hertz. So some musicians and composers use C as the tuning note instead of A. And so, of course, that frequency is going to be different. Originally, because there was no way of measuring it, people tune to the town bell, or, the chainsaw down the street, something that would had a consistent sound. That's what they would use to tune to. A worldwide concert pitch standard was set in 1939 to A440. And I'm just going to say here, because there's a lot of questions, why didn't they choose 432? Well, remember, at the time in the late 1930s was the beginning of sound amplification. Prior to that, if you wanted to be heard, you had to either play at a higher concert pitch, or you had to add more musicians to the ensemble. Marching bands, outdoor concerts, the higher the concert pitch, the easier it can be heard. And even though there were lower concert pitches around the earth, again, because we're just going into the age of sound amplification, it makes sense to my brain that A440 was chosen over lower concert pitches. Some countries still prefer higher concert pitches today because they sound brighter in tone quality. Not only are they brighter, but they are louder. That's why you can hear a piccolo pierce through an entire orchestra. One little teeny piccolo can play through an entire orchestra. Listen to Beethoven's Sixth Symphony, The Storm Scene. An example of this, when I went to France in 1988, that dates me, for a competition. I was one of 3 American clarinetists who were there, and we get this letter, not an email, because email didn't exist back then, saying, we're going to tune our pianos to A442 and be prepared for that. Well, since when your instrument warms up, you're going to play sharp anyway, it wasn't a big deal. For the first time, and I can't tell you how long, I didn't feel like I was playing sharp. It was nice. Some orchestras currently use historical pitch with period instruments to bring back the sound of a specific era. So there are a variety of historical pitches before the 20th century, and period instruments are instruments that were made during a specific era. Musical instruments had major issues until the 1800s, when the Industrial Revolution modernized instrument making. A variety of temperaments were used, which made it more challenging during the instrument building process. I could see some clarinet builder going to an instrument maker in Germany and saying, can you build this for me using just intonation? And then the next guy comes along and says, can you build this for me using well temperament? Well, which version of well temperament are you talking about? It was all specific to the individual. So you can imagine, with so many variations in instrument making, that this was a builder's nightmare. Keyboard players often traveled with their instruments because there was no standard of making instruments until the Romantic era at the time of the Industrial Revolution. Equal temperament. I'm going to refer to it as ET, and I'm not talking about the movie ET Phone Home. Anyway, equal temperament. It became the temperament standard in the 1800s. And we'll see a little bit of variation on that as we get further into this presentation. Concert pitch versus temperament. Here I'm going to explain the difference. Even though I've done this in other videos and blog posts, I'm just bringing it back here. Simple explanation. Temperament sets the distance between each note of the scale. Examples of temperament: equal temperament, Pythagorean, just, mean tone, Verkler, well temperament. Those are all examples of temperaments where you're adjusting the distance between each note. Concert pitch sets the tuning of all of the notes to your chosen temperament. You pick one note, which now we're using A. Some people still use C, depending on the piece of music, what was the original intention of that piece of music. So concert pitch, you take all the notes in the temperament you've chosen, and then you tune the rest of all the other notes to that one note. A440, A432, C256, those, so A440 hertz, 440 hertz, 432 hertz, 256 hertz. Those are all examples of concert pitch. So that means if you're tuning to 256, you're going to tune that C, which is the octave below middle C. I think it is. I'd have to look it up again. And you're going to tune every other note on the piano or your guitar or your violin or whatever string instrument to that C instead of the A above middle C. The current concert pitch standard begins with the A above middle C. Prior to the 1800s, musicians chose a tuning note based on the musical key and the preferred temperaments. Some composers really preferred specific keys, and they would choose a temperament. All right, now we're going to take a walk down history lane, not that far back from some of us. Early computers. If you've ever heard about the Apple computer on the left or the IBM, I actually still have my original Apple computer. It looks just like that. And I still have all the floppies, which if you can, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it goes into this little slot here. And it's, I think 5 inches wide. This one, it goes inside this area here and it's much bigger, but you could only put like 3 or 4 documents on each one of them. Nothing could be stored in the computer. They were extremely limited. Problems lead to better solutions. Early musical instruments had limitations, just like early computers had limitations. Because the early computers could only hold a few documents on one disk. And you couldn't do all those cool programs on those that you can now. The earliest computers had minimal possibilities. Early instruments had issues with keys, valves, strings, and string players used gut strings, by the way, usually cat gut. Don't tell your cat that. Tone hole placement. There's so many things that early wind instruments and even string instruments had issues with. Imagine the limitations you'd have if all you had is an IBM computer from the 1980s. That's the only computer you were ever allowed to use. Most of us in the year 2024 would not be happy with that. Oh, there was no internet either. So you'd only have at your fingertips what is sitting on that computer. Problems with musical instruments and tuning is what led to setting concert pitch and temperament standards. People got tired of the wing it and hope it happens method. That only works for so long before people say, we want something better. And because I'm a clarinetist, I'm going to show you some examples of early instruments. This first one is in a museum in England. I don't know what the concert pitch is, but I'm guessing it's going to hover somewhere around 430. Some of those instruments were down as low as 417. You're going to see there's only 5 keys. I mean, there was only one way to play these notes here. And I'm sitting here looking at this. All right, to play F sharp, to play A flat. I mean, you have to use all these forked fingerings. Music was is still much more difficult to play in one of these instruments than it is a modern clarinet. I'll take a modern clarinet over this any day. Now, if I were playing Mozart, it'd be really fun to play this instrument because then it would feel like I was actually in the time of Mozart playing on the instrument that Mozart knew. Over here, you can see one of the original instruments for clarinet that was invented in 1710. And as you'll notice, by looking at all these throughout the years, we've added more keys. This is our modern clarinet, and there's so many more keys with alternate fingerings and so many things that you can do to make that instrument play better. I mean, there is no comparison between this instrument over here, the one in the London Museum, and this clarinet over here that I play on today. Yeah, this might be kind of fun because I want to play the Mozart concerto on that instrument. Well, no, it'd be a Bassett clarinet that's similar to that. But it's easier. There's no way you could play modern music on this instrument. Not the way it's written now. It would be too much practice. So there you see one of the reasons why we've got to continue finding better ways to make things work. Okay. And this is just showing you, here's a picture of, it's Cameron's music in Michigan. I took this picture off his website. So I am crediting him for the picture. And you can see he's working on a saxophone. You know, there are all of these tools and all of these things that are used to fix wind instruments now. I mean, back in the day, the way they had pads, you would, whatever you could find to put a pad together, they leaked. They didn't seat very well. And so you go to play low notes and they wouldn't come out right. And you're constantly fixing them. I had to fix an instrument in some clarinet the day before a concert just last week. I was helping a local school and some sixth grader walks up and says, I lost a pad, couldn't find the pad. So we used some gum and some duct tape and kind of stuffed a bunch of things in the pad cup just so the thing would seat well enough so they could play the low register of the clarinet. So there's so many issues that come with instruments that can affect tuning, affect the way they play, et cetera, et cetera. So why is tuning a problem? It's in the details. And I've just given you some of the instruments problem. Okay, here is a tuning chart that is an A440 in equal temperament. And I'll explain to you a little bit more what equal temperament is. So A440 is the concert pitch and equal temperament is the modern standard. This is our, if you were to go look up a frequency chart, this is what you would find. A worldwide concert pitch standard was set in 1939, which I've already said that. Temperament standard was loosely set in the 1800s. You'll understand the loosely here in a bit. Standards allowed musicians to need only one instrument when they traveled. Imagine going from your city to the next city and you needed a wrench. I mean, you needed a socket set. Well, your city measures the socket set different than the city next to you measures their socket set differently. So there's no way they're not interchangeable. They don't work together because they're not made to work together. So by setting equal temperament as the standard temperament and concert pitch to 440, musicians could travel all over the world and play with other musicians for the first time ever. Standards allowed instrument makers to use a similar set of measurements. No longer do you have the problem of, hey, can you build me this instrument in this concert pitch in this temperament? Now that we've standardized it, things are much more accessible. That doesn't necessarily make music better, but there's no nefarious reason for why we have it. It came out of need and desire for performing more complicated pieces of music. A440 can be used with a variety of temperaments. So you could still use A440, but use mean tone, just, intonation, well temperament, Verkler, and a variety of others. Pythagorean, you'd still set A at 440 and change the temperament, just so you're aware of that. Tuning problem, that tuning problem. Tuning has been an issue since the invention of musical instruments. It was doubly made difficult upon the invention of keyboard instruments in the early Baroque era. So prior to ET, equal temperament, tuning was a nightmare once keyboard and fretted instruments were introduced. Why? Until ET became the standard, keyboard musicians were limited to playing in related keys without having to completely retune the instrument. Because intervals make, we'll get to that later. It all has to do with musical intervals. Tuning problems involve a variety of factors, including temperature, humidity, intervals, playing with other instruments, the limitations of individual instruments, and the music itself. So all of these factors play into tuning problems. The more complicated the music, like what we were playing from the Romantic era on, you're talking about Wagner, Brahms, all those dudes, even into modern music, even into the rock music. If you were to do rock music in some of the temperaments that were earlier, most people probably wouldn't enjoy it. Now I'm going to show you a temperament comparison chart using C 261.626 as the concert pitch. We've got 5 here. We've got Pythagorean, just, mean tone, Berkmeister, and equal. Those are 5 different temperaments, and you'll notice the C is the same across the board. But now let's go down and look at A. Because you're adjusting temperaments, you're adjusting the distance between each of the notes, you're going to notice that even the B, Pythagorean, is 496.6. Here it is in just is 490. Mean tone is 489. Werkmeister is 491. Equal is 493. So there's slight differences. Now let's look at the A. 441 in Pythagorean. 436 in just. That's quite a bit lower. 437 in mean tone. 437 in Werkmeister. And 440 in equal temperament. So all this is showing you the change of the distance between notes depending on the temperament. So the distance from 465 to 437 is actually closer. It's narrower than the distance from 466 to 440. If we look at 468 to 437, this one, because this one's 468 is slightly higher than 466, and 437 is slightly lower. This distance might be about the same as equal temperament, but the pitches are going to be slightly different. And it's the same across the board. So the whole point of this picture is to show you that depending on your temperament, it's going to determine all of the pitches between the outer notes. I mean, you're seeing actually the lower notes are here at the bottom. 261 from the bottom, and it's going up the scale. And that's how they've done it. So keep that in mind. Oh, and other thing is octaves are always pure. So this is always going to be a doubling of that. So 261.63 times 2 is going to equal 523.25, which is why they're the same in all of them. Octaves are always pure in every temperament, as you can see that here. And again, for those of you who are visual people and who like numbers, this should explain to you why the octaves are the same, but the distance, all the different notes in between are going to be different depending on which temperament you choose. They're all tuned to this C. But the distance between notes is going to be different depending on which temperament you choose. Musical intervals. An interval is the distance from one note to the next. Intervals are tuned within each chord. Good musicians adjust pitch to match tuning within a chord. Intervals are either pure or impure. Musicians can choose where to place a pitch for its color. Major thirds are always sharp. So if you find out that you're in an ensemble and all of a sudden you find that your note is the third of the chord, you are going to have to lower it so that it sounds in tune. So that same note might sound great if you're playing the fifth of the scale, but if you're playing the third, you got to do something to lower the pitch. So that's what tuning is all about. You're tempering it. You basically just change from equal temperament. So we really never stay in equal temperament unless you're a piano player or fretted keyboard player, because we're constantly making adjustments depending on what note within the chord we're playing. Musicians and ensembles must understand what part of the chord they're playing so they know how to tune specific notes. This is one of the reasons beginners sound like not so good. They haven't learned how to do that yet. Performing with a keyboard or fretted string is different than playing with wind or strings because they can't adjust pitches during performance. Tuning on musical instruments. Humidity and temperature affect tuning of all wind, percussion, and string instruments. Fretted instruments and keyboards, piano, harpsichord, clavichord, etc., were designed to play close to equal temperament before the Industrial Revolution. Notice I said close. Equal temperament was permanently established in the 1800s once a method of measuring became available. Some modern electronic keyboards can play in a variety of concert pitches and temperaments. Pianos can only play in equal temperament, and they are designed to play in A440. So please don't go ask your piano tuner to change it to 444 or 432. The instruments are not made to do that. Now, of course, if you have a really old piano that's been sitting around for 100 years, yeah, that one will do great in 432. Each musical instrument has a different set of issues, including tuning, fingerings, how temperatures affect it, and its acoustics. Key signatures matter. So you're going to notice here off to the left, tuning intervals is important in every key. So you're going to notice here, the key of C has no sharps or flats. Notice what we'll wait till we get to the next one. So the key of D has two sharps, F sharp, and you're going to notice that this is different. They're calling it F, but this is really F sharp, and you can tell because there's such a big difference between these two frequencies. And the same thing with the C sharp. You're going to notice 524 to 552. The reason it's different is because this is C sharp and this is F sharp. Okay, so I just thought I'd point that out before we get too much further. So there is the notes. There are the notes in the D major scale. Now, as you look at these different ones, so if you're starting on C, the E is going to be 327.5. If you on this is Pythagorean tuning, by the way. If you're starting on the D, then this F is going to be 368.5. Wait, sorry, the E is 331.6. All right, let me go back. So E is 327.5 when you're starting on the note C in Pythagorean. If you're starting on the note D, that E becomes 331 hertz. Now let's go back and look at the B because it's the same in both. 491.2 in when key of C is being used and 491.3 when the key of D is being used. Now let's look at the G. 393.0 when C is the key, 393.1 when the key of D is used. Now there's not a lot of difference because C and D are fairly closely related, but if I was to change this to an F sharp scale, they would be very different. Because the further away you get from the original key, the more sharps you add, the more flats you add, the more dissonant it will be, which is one of the reasons why they had so many problems in the early Baroque era. Here's an example of the harmonic series, setting A at 55 hertz in the A440 concert pitch. And you're going to notice this is going all the way up to the 20th partial. I explained the harmonic series in several other videos, but I will do a quick synopsis here. So here is the harmonic series, and I put the tuning chart next to it, and I'm going to compare this harmonic series with the actual frequencies in equal temperament and just see what it looks like here in just a second. So we're going to review temperament first, though. Temperament determines the distance each note is placed within an octave. Octaves are pure in every form of temperament. ET places each interval at the ratio of a 12th root of 2. I don't understand the math. Those of you who are mathematicians, you'll get it. All notes within the octave have equal distance. To me, that makes sense. They're all the same distance apart in equal temperament. That's why it's called equal temperament, because all the notes in the scale are equal distance. Other temperaments, mean tone, just, Pythagorean, etc., they're going to have differing distances between intervals within the octave, which you saw when I showed you the chart comparing the 5 different temperaments. Early temperaments were often chosen to favor musical color, and we'll get into that a bit here in a minute. And that color is often created a specific mood or feeling. It's like going to a movie and you hear really dissonant music. when something gets screechy, you're thinking, oh my gosh, something horrible is going to happen. They're using the music to create the mood. Early musicians did the same thing, but they did it with temperament and tuning. Music is all about the emotions. Temperament can be used to bring out a composer's specific intended feeling, or what we call it now, the vibe of the music. Okay, now here I'm doing the comparison. So the harmonic series with temperament comparison. Basically, you can build a harmonic series on any frequency. So you start with the frequency. In this case, I used 55 hertz. So you add 55 plus 55 and you get 110 hertz. Add another 55, you get 165. Add another 55, you get 220. Add another 55, you get 275. Add 55 again, you get 330. This over here is the partial number, and these are the specific notes. These are the specific frequencies. Now, if I compare these numbers here from the natural harmonic series to the Python, now this is with the fundamental frequency of an A. Okay, keep that in mind because this is all going to change if it's G sharp or B flat or C or F. This will all change because it's all based on adding, what's in the harmonic series itself of each specific note. You're going to add the same number up over and over, 55 plus 55 plus 55 plus 55 plus 55. If you have 27 hertz, it's going to be 27 plus 27 plus 27 plus 27. So the notes will be somewhat similar, but not exactly the same. And that will affect how music sounds. Okay, so let's take a look at this. So if we look at this E in equal temperament, it's 164.81, actually quite close. In Pythagorean, it's slightly lower in pitch, 163.75. 220 is going to be the same because it's the octave of, well, it's 2 octaves higher. Okay, and you're going to notice all of the octaves are going to be in the same, are going to be the same because this is A, it's always going to be the same no matter which one, because octaves are pure no matter the temperament. Now let's take a look at this one. The 11th harmonic, 605 here, but in equal temperament, that same note is 622 hertz. It's slightly sharp, but not terrible. And then here in Pythagorean, it's slightly lower. You're going to hardly hear the difference between these two pitches. This you'll hear more so than this one. 660 is the 12th harmonic, which is an E. It's 659.26 in equal, and 655, which is slightly lower in Pythagorean. So again, this is to show you the difference in the distance between notes and how that works with natural tuning. Okay. All right. Higher hertz numbers indicate a higher pitch. Lower hertz numbers indicate a lower pitch. Octaves, perfect fifth, perfect fourth, major third, and minor third are pure intervals in the harmonic series. That's these right here. So A to E, that's a perfect fifth. That is perfectly in tune. You go from E to the next A higher. That's a perfect fourth. That is perfectly in tune. A to C sharp, 220 hertz to 275 is pure. So that's why, and the minor third, C sharp to E, that's also pure. So you're going to notice these first 6 intervals are very strong and stable. So when they're pure, they're stable. And they color the music. And that's what gives each instrument its tone, because they have a different variety of harmonics in it. Octaves are pure intervals in Pythagorean tuning with the perfect fifth and perfect fourth are extremely close. You can hardly hear that there's just a tiny bit of beating, but not much. The major thirds in Pythagorean tuning are very sharp. That's one reason that they didn't use major thirds in the Renaissance. Octaves are pure intervals in equal temperament. All other intervals are close. Here's an example of how harmonics work. Does this shape look familiar to you? A nautilus shell, if that's the first thing you thought. But this is just showing the shape the waveform or the wavelength of all the different harmonics that you saw in, I wonder if it'll let me go back. Here in this list there. That is showing all of the natural harmonics. Okay. So when I go back to this is a representation of that, what you saw written out. Here, this is what the strengths of the harmonics look like in the guitar, for example. Here's the piano. Here's a flute. Here's a violin. Here's an organ. And here's a saxophone. They all are playing the same note, but notice how they're very different. The peaks are the strongest harmonics, and these, the dips, are the ones that are the weakest. So different instruments are going to have different sounds based on which harmonics in that each specific note is stronger or weaker than another one. So this is the voice print of a guitar, the voice print of a piano, the voice print of a flute and a violin and a saxophone and an organ. And if you spoke into it, your voice would look different than your neighbor's. Okay, enough said about that. Now I'm going to read a couple things from an article by Carl Radford, from radfordpiano.com. He went to the December 1991 North Shore chapter of the Piano Technicians Guild. They call it the PTG. This is piano tuners learning all things about tuning pianos. I'm going to read this quote. I thought this was fascinating. This explains so much of what I've been saying earlier. Various theoretical equal temperaments have come up throughout the history of tuning since early China. But equal temperament, as we know it today, cannot have existed until 1917, when William Braid White discovered beat rates. And that's a wah, 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 that you hear. Up until that time, tuners tuned by fifths, chords, and colors. Equal temperament was only a theory that tuners strove for, had the mathematical knowledge for, but did not have the ability to achieve because they could not count beats yet. Equal temperament is based on a mathematical concept, splitting the octave into 12 equal parts, or the 12th root of 2, not a naturally occurring acoustic concept. But what equal temperament does is it allows us to play in all 12 keys and play very complicated music. Here's more from that same lecture. Owen began to show us what we've been missing on various pianos, namely color. He went back and forth from piano to piano, playing various pieces by differing composers, and always comparing to the one Mason and Hamlin with equal temperament. The results were astonishing and inspiring. All of a sudden, music which we have played and heard many times before came to life. I never much cared for Italian Renaissance or even Baroque music, but when played on a well or mean toned temperaments, they had meaning that simply doesn't exist on an equally tempered piano. He would play a piece in, say, C major, and then play it again in several other keys. They sounded acceptable in other keys, even passable, certainly not offensive. But when played in the proper key, it suddenly made more sense and came alive again. Also, Mozart, Brahms, Debussy, Beethoven came to life. As we move on to this last piece, keep in mind that composers in the early 17 and 1800s they only had what they had to work with. They didn't have the technology that we have today. Had they had equal temperament, they might have done things different. Pythagorean ratios across time. Now, I got this from Libre Text Physics, but then I realized he had some pieces that were missing. So that's why you're going to see looks like I managed to get it in. I added the word late here. so my font is slightly different. So the major third, you see that in the late Renaissance. The minor sixth, you also see, he just had Renaissance, but you really didn't see it until the late Renaissance. The minor third has been around since the beginning of time. It is the easiest interval to sing, and you couldn't do the pentatonic scale without the minor third. And the pentatonic scale has been around since we've been making music. So that's why I have ancient times. The late Renaissance is where we start seeing the major sixth. Indian and modern music and in the Romantic is where we have the natural seventh. Slightly, I think it's slightly lower than the standard that we've got now. And this one is the semi-augmented fourth, which we're not necessarily seeing it now. But here are the frequency ratio rates for those. And these are the sizes in cents. The cents between pitches is 1,200 possible cents. And you divide that into ratios. And there are the ratios to show that this particular, the fifth, is at 701.85.95 cents above this starting pitch. So there you're seeing it in ratios and cents. And we'll let that fly away. Temperament and concert pitch developed over time. Once a new technique or discovery is made, everyone wants the latest and greatest gadget, especially if it makes life easier. Musicians worked with what they had available to them at the time. Until the 19th century, I'm putting a question mark because I'm not 100% positive the exact date. And so until the 19th century, pianists and composers tuned their own instruments so they could choose temperament based on the music that they either wrote or wanted to perform. That all changed as we got closer to the 20th century because then we had piano tuners because instruments got more complicated to deal with. String players can play in any temperament unless they have frets, like guitars and lutes. Wind players are limited to the temperament that the instrument was built, but no need to fear. I can play in a lot more temperaments than equal temperament by shading notes, changing, there's a lot of ways you can go outside the temperament on a wind instrument. Wind instruments can make small adjustments in temperament through alternate fingerings, shading, using your fingers, especially on clarinet and flute and saxophone, instruments that have keys and holes. Voicing is where you're using the inside of your mouth. You're changing the inside of the mouth, can also change the tone color, and it can change the pitch. An embouchure, that's adjusting your lips, can also help change pitch. So wind players, we have the ability to go outside equal temperament and adjust as we go. Temperament and concert pitch today. There's a revival of earlier temperaments to bring back the intended color of the composer's music. Musical color refers to a balance of consonance and dissonance within a piece of music. Composer might want consonants in a lot of places, but all of a sudden they want a certain amount of dissonance. They're going to specifically write it in a specific key because they know that temperament is going to make all the other notes consonants, but that one note they really want to be dissonant. See, we don't have that ability anymore, so we have to do other things. It's not that we can't do it, it's just different now than it was then. Modern music more than likely won't sound good in earlier temperaments because it's more complicated than earlier music. Temperament and concert pitch are as personal to a musician as the clothing that they wear. There is no right or wrong concert pitch or temperament. And the conclusion is intention. It's a good word. Determines everything about music, temperament, concert pitch, and what's enjoyable. There is nothing wrong with A440. It allows modern musicians to access other musicians around the world. Without some standard, musicians would need several instruments. Musical harmonics play a major role in how tuning works. Music is based on natural laws that balance consonance and dissonance. The invention of musical instruments created a need for determining temperament and concert pitch so musicians could play as an ensemble. We really didn't begin having problems with tuning until instruments came around, specifically keyboards, because they're so much more limited into how they can adjust than a wind instrument or string instrument. The A432 concert pitch closely matches what's found in nature. So if you enjoy nature, listen to the A432 music when you're desiring to align with the natural world. That's the one thing that I have been able to figure out. Beyond that, I don't think there's so many things that you can do. And with that, I'm Healing Frequencies Music at healingfrequenciesmusic.com. I offer personal songs where I create a specific song for you individually. I give sound baths using crystal bowls and percussions where you choose your own bowls. And all that's on the Healing Frequencies Music website. I create a lot of instrumental albums. I have singles, lots of healing music. And I have a subscription for a song of the month, which you get a song with a voiceover activation and a PDF explaining what to do and how to do it. I offer coaching and mentoring in a variety of ways. So check it out on the page. And I have several courses. And I have a frequency immersion practitioner program where if you want to learn how to give sound baths, where you're intermixing it with the science of music, then I offer that to you as well. Okay, so that is the end of that. And we are going to stop sharing and I'm going to get out of that. All right. This is a longer presentation than I normally do, but I didn't want to have to split it into two. And thank you for putting up with the cats playing while we're listening to that, all the dingling and jingling sound. That was Tilly playing under the piano. So continue to send me your questions. And as you do, then I will create more videos and or blog posts. I'm not going to do a blog post for this one because I have several articles that go over a lot of the materials. I've just taken bits and pieces and just put them into one. But the overall thing is, please don't be fearful of A440. If you like A440 and it feels good to you, use it. I've been playing an A440 my whole life. There's nothing wrong with me. I'm perfectly fine. I like the music I listen to, but I also like playing in other keys and temperaments as well. All I'm saying is that music is extremely complicated. And consonants and dissonance are built into how music works. It doesn't seem like it's possible, but I'd go back and watch this video again, screenshot some of those things and go do some of the research yourself. But trust me, there's nothing in music that's harmful unless you intend it to be, or the lyrics in the music are nasty. We'll just leave it at that. So I hope you've enjoyed this. As usual, please subscribe to the channel and share these videos with other people to feed the algorithm to get more people over to Healing Frequencies Music. So thank you, and we'll see you next time.